Good morning. Today we publish a white paper on immigration, a strategy absolutely central to my plan for change that will finally take back control of our borders and close the book on a squalid chapter for our politics, our economy and our country. Take back control. Everyone knows that slogan. And everyone knows what it meant on immigration, or at least that's what people thought. Because what followed from the previous government, starting with the people who used that slogan, was the complete opposite. Between 2019 and 2023, even as they were going round our country, telling people with a straight face that they would get immigration down, net migration quadrupled until in 2023 it reached nearly 1 million. That's about the population of Birmingham, our second largest city. That's not control, it's chaos. And look, they must answer for themselves. But I don't think that you can do something like that by accident. It was a choice made even as they told you, told the country, they were doing the opposite. A one-nation experiment in open borders, conducted on a country that voted for control. Well, no more. Today, this Labour government is shutting down the lab. The experiment is over. We will deliver what you've asked for time and again, and we will take back control of our borders. And let me tell you why. Because I know, on a day like today, people who like politics will try to make this all about politics, about this or that strategy, targeting these voters, responding to that party. No. I'm doing this because it is right, because it is fair, and because it is what I believe in. Let me put it this way. Nations depend on rules, fair rules. Sometimes they're written down, often they're not. But either way, they give shape to our values, guide us towards our rights, of course, but also our responsibilities, the obligations we owe to each other. Now, in a diverse nation like ours, and I celebrate that, these rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together. So when you have an immigration system that seems almost designed to permit abuse, that encourages some businesses to bring in lower paid workers rather than invest in our young people, or simply one that is sold by politicians to the British people on an entirely false premise, then you're not championing growth, you're not championing justice, or however else people defend the status quo. You're actually contributing to the forces that are slowly pulling our country apart. So yes, I believe in this. I believe we need to reduce immigration significantly. That's why some of the policies in this white paper go back nearly 3 years. Why I told the Labour Party conference, taking back control is a Labour argument. And why, most importantly of all, inward migration is already falling with this government. It's about fairness. And look, migration is part of Britain's national story. We talked last week about the great rebuilding of this country after the war. Migrants were part of that, and they make a massive contribution today. And you will never hear me denigrate that. But when people come to our country, they should also commit to integration, to learning our language. And our system should actively distinguish between those that do and those that don't. I think that's fair. Equally, Britain must compete for the best talent in the world, in science, in technology, in healthcare. You can't simply pull up a drawbridge, let nobody in, and think that's an economy that would work. That would hurt the pay packets of working people without question. But at the same time, we do have to ask why parts of our economy seem almost addicted to importing cheap labour, rather than investing in the skills of people who are here and want a good job in their community. Sectors like engineering, where visas have rocketed while apprenticeships have plummeted. Is that fair to Britain? Is that fair to young people, weighing up their future to miss out on those apprentices? To see colleges in their community almost entirely dedicated to one-year courses for overseas students? No, I don't think that it is. And truth be told, I don't think anybody does. Yet that is the Britain this broken system has created. So as this white paper sets out, every area of the immigration system, work, family and study, will be tightened up so we have more control. Skill requirements raised to degree level. English language requirements across all routes, including for dependents. The time it takes to acquire settled status extended from 5 years to 10. And enforcement tougher than ever, because fair rules must be followed. Now, make no mistake, this plan means migration will fall. That's a promise. But I want to be very clear on this. If we do need to take further steps, if we do need to do more to release pressure on housing and our public services, then mark my words, we will. But it's not just about numbers, because the chaos of the previous government also changed the nature of immigration in this country. Fewer people who make a strong economic contribution, more who work in parts of our economy that put downward pressure on wages. So perhaps the biggest shift in this white paper is that we will finally honour what take back control meant and begin to choose who comes here, so that migration works for our national interest. You know, this is where the whole debate is skewed, as if some people think controlling immigration is reining in a sort of natural freedom, rather than the basic and reasonable responsibility of government to make choices that work for a nation's economy. And for years, this seems to have muddled our thinking. But let me be clear, it ends now. We will create a migration system that is controlled, selective, and fair. A clean break with the past that links access to visas directly to investment in homegrown skills, so that if a business wants to bring people in from abroad, they must first invest in Britain, but also so settlement becomes a privilege that is earned, not a right. Easier if you make a contribution, if you work, pay in, and help rebuild our country. Now, some people may even be against that, but I think for the vast majority of people in this country, that is what they have long wanted to see. An immigration system that is fair, that works for our national interest, and that restores common sense and control to our borders. That is what this white paper will deliver. Lower net migration, higher skills, backing British workers. The start of repairing our social contract, which the chaos and cynicism of the last government did so much to undermine. Thank you. I will now take a number of questions from the media. I've got a hopefully accurate list here, starting with Chris Mason, BBC.
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Lacey, BBC News. Let's be clear, are you promising today that net migration will fall every year between now and the next election, come what may?
Well, I'm promising it will fall significantly, and I do want to get it down by the end of this Parliament significantly. That is what this plan is intended to achieve, the complete opposite of what you saw in the last 4 years. It is frankly incredible that net migration quadrupled in 4 short years to nearly 1 million. This white paper, these plans bring it back into control, make sure it's controlled, that is selective, that we decide who comes to this country, and that it is fair. And that's what we will do, significant reduction in immigration. And as I've indicated, if it becomes necessary to take further measures, then that's what we will do. Thank you. Robert, ITV.
Robert Peston, ITV. Prime Minister, you know that countries that want to grow are in a global race for top talent. Your number one priority is growth. Haven't you shot yourself in the foot by insisting that those who want to be citizens now have to live here twice as long as those who want to be American citizens? And if I may, we've just heard that there will be a 90-day massive reduction in the tariffs that China and America are imposing on each other. Are you relieved that at least temporarily they've laid down their economic arms?
Well, let me take both those points. I'm not encouraging 2 questions each because we've got to just get through this. On the growth question, I do think this is worth taking some time on because the theory that higher migration numbers necessarily leads to higher growth has been tested in the last 4 years. So we've had the highest net migration when the last government lost control to nearly 1 million and stagnant growth. And so that link doesn't hold on that evidence. The second thing is that this white paper is not just a white paper on immigration, it's also a white paper that deals with skills and training. And one of the reasons that we've had stagnant growth, in my view, for years, is because we've underinvested chronically in skills and growth. So by putting skills and growth into the same plan as migration, which is something businesses have been asking for years, you actually answer the growth question as well. And I should say as a footnote to that, as you heard in the speech and you'll see in the white paper, in relation to high talent, where we want the very best into the country, we will have routes to get that talent into this country. And I think there's real potential for us to do so in the current environment, and we intend to do so. On the question of the China tariffs, I just saw something flash up in the room back there. I'm not across the complete detail. I'm very pleased, obviously, that we struck our trade deal with the US last week, which will be measured in very many thousands of jobs and billions of pounds into our economy. Thank you, Robert. Sam from Sky. Sam.
Sam Keir Starmer, Prime Minister, just to pick up on growth and migration. One of the reasons that we've had a laxer migration policy for years is because of basically the Treasury view. Successive chancellors, their fiscal rules, and the way that that interacts with the official forecasts means it's always been an easy win to have more growth by having more people in the country. What's your message today to the Treasury, to the OBR, and are you doing anything to actually change the way that they work and look at all this stuff and calculate the cost-benefit analysis of growth and migration?
Yeah, well, thank you, Sam. Just succinctly, and then adding to the answer I just gave. Firstly, the pure theory, if you like, that simply higher migration numbers necessarily leads to higher growth, I think has been tested in the last 4 years. We quadrupled in actually a very short period of time. And, you know, I think whatever political persuasion you are, it is quite extraordinary that net migration quadrupled in 4 years. We've never seen that before in this country, but growth didn't shift. It stayed stagnant. Secondly, this point about skills and migration, what businesses have been calling out for a long time is link migration to the skills and training that we need in this country. In the past, governments have done sort of knee-jerk reductions without making that link. We're making that link in this paper, which is really important in terms of where we go with the economy, because I do think it's underinvestment in those areas that's caused a lot of the problem. The other thing that the paper is doing is readjusting the model, because it's got to a place now where there's many more low-skilled jobs rather than high-skilled jobs. So by adjusting the threshold for skills, this allows migration to be in the areas of high skills, which are more likely to make a significant contribution to our economy. Thank you very much, Sam. I've got Gary from Channel 4.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Have you been on a bit of a journey yourself on this? Did you used to believe that higher immigration led to higher growth? Would Keir Starmer a few years ago have talked about an island of strangers? Are you one of the people who now thinks that Article 8 of the ECHR is actually a problem and not something that's just exaggerated by other people?
Well, Gary, thank you very much. I invite you to dig out my conference speech at Labour Party conference. I know you remember them all. But 3 years ago now, I think it was, when I made the very political argument that I've made this morning, which is that take back control, understanding why you need control, selection of fair immigration is a Labour argument. And once you've dug out that transcript, there's then the speech I made to the CBI, I think about 3 years ago, making the same argument in relation to business, saying too many businesses, in my view, are too dependent on migration rather than training and skilling up people in this country. And I was signalling to the CBI then that would change under a Labour government. So there's a core consistency through here. On Article 8, yeah, we do want to ensure that the right balance is made in migration cases in relation to the national interest. There's a balance set out in legislation already. That needs to be adjusted, in my view, and that's what we will do. Thank you, Gary. Chris Hope, sorry. There's a lot of Chris's.
Chris Hope, GB News. Prime Minister, we've been here before, haven't we? There have been 3 Immigration Acts since 2014. The Immigration Act in 2014 and 2016 both aimed to reduce immigration. They both failed. Why on earth should GB News viewers think you're going to succeed? And why not give us a promise right now? Why give us a fixed target right now, not a promise, so we can judge you on success? The Tories at least did that, but they failed.
Well, look, the difference here, this is the most comprehensive plan that has been put forward. It's been forward to end the Tory sort of open borders experiment that we have had. You're right about that. And it looks at all routes, and it's comprehensive. And it does the hard yards of linking skills and business to what we need to do with the economy. So it's not a narrow look just at the numbers. It puts them in their proper context. On the question, which we do want to significantly reduce migration, I'm absolutely making clear that's what it will do, and that if we need to go further, we will. So that's the promise I make to your viewers. I don't think it's sensible to put a hard-edged cap on it. That has been done in one form or another for the best part of 10 years by different prime ministers. The only thing that links those prime ministers and the various caps or quotas or limits they put in place is every single one of them failed. And therefore, going down the failed route is not a sensible way for me. As with everything that I do, serious, pragmatic, looking at the things that will actually make a material difference. Thank you, Chris. Jerry from The Times.
Prime Minister Jerry Scott from The Times. What is your message to the 9 million inactive adults in the UK at the moment who might not think that they should take work in a care home, for example, and also to some of your Labour MPs who might be squeamish about Labour government taking a tough line on immigration? Well,
firstly, that's acknowledged within that 9 million. There are some people who can't work, and we need to be clear about that from the start. But there are others who can, and as we've set out in our welfare provisions, the principles are clear. Where people can't work and are unlikely to be able to work, they should be protected and supported. But where people can get into work, they should be supported. The current system does the opposite, and so we will support them into work with a £1 billion package, the right to try, and measures like that. And that if you can work, you should work. And I do think that this white paper should be seen in conjunction with what we're doing on welfare. And on squeamishness, I actually think that the Labour Party has as core values the idea that immigration should be controlled, that it should be selective. We should be choosing who we want, higher skills, the high talent routes into our country. And it must be fair. They're basic Labour arguments and concepts for many, many years. Thank you. I've got Jack from The Sun. Jack.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You said just now this is a comprehensive plan to bring down legal migration. You also said in the election you had a comprehensive plan to bring down illegal migration, and so far it seems that isn't working. Small boat crossings are going up on your watch. So why should voters think that your plan to bring down illegal migration will fare any better, especially given you're considering an EU youth mobility scheme, which could actually increase it?
Well, let's tackle that head on, because nobody should be getting in a small boat to cross over the channel and illegally entering this country. The last government lost control of the borders. It falls to this government to clear up that mess in the same way we're clearing up all the other messes that they left behind. I am convinced that the way to do that is to take down the gangs that are running the vile trade. And for that reason, we've drafted and put before Parliament a borders bill, which follows through on the promises I made, which is we need to give law enforcement greater powers. Going down the counter-terrorism powers, the thing that distinguishes counter-terrorism from other law enforcement is you can take action earlier. You can be preemptive. You can operate in a completely different way. That's why we've gone for a package that allows law enforcement to get in much earlier. That is going through Parliament. Who is voting against that? The Tories, who caused the problem in the first place. Thank you, Jack. Martin from the Daily Mail. Martin.
Prime Minister Martin Beckford from the Daily Mail. Gary asked if you've been on a journey on net migration. Similarly, you talked about tough enforcement. One of today's measures is for foreign nationals convicted of any offence to be considered for deportation. Yet just 5 years ago, you signed a letter calling for the halt to a deportation flight that contained, amongst others, 2 people convicted of rape and 3 of GBH. Your views have changed, haven't they?
No, I've always said that those who commit offences should be deported. I ran the Crown Prosecution Service for 5 years between 2008 and 2013, and it fell to my prosecutors on my instructions to ask for the deportations in the first place in the Crown courts. So I've been really clear. I've been in charge of cases where we routinely asked for the judge, because that's the way the system operated in those days, to add to the sentence an order at the end that there should be a deportation. So what's that? That's going back the best part of 20 years. Thank you very much. And I've got Michael from the Daily Express.
Thank you.
Michael.
Does going further mean disentangling ourselves from the ECHR and disapplying human rights laws in immigration cases?
No, I don't think that is necessary. I also remind myself that the international agreements we've signed have given us the basis for the deals that we've struck on illegal migration. So the Home Secretary has moved fast, working with other countries, to put in place materially improved deals with other countries in relation to migration. That would not have been possible if we had been saying at the same time we're about to withdraw from our international obligations. I could give you many more examples than that, but you can't strike those deals with other countries to work more closely together on law enforcement to smash the gangs, and to work on returns agreements, which is what we want to do, if in the next breath you're saying you don't believe in international law. If you do, you can strike the deals. If you don't, you can't. And one of the features of the last government is they struggled to strike these deals because other countries said, if you don't comply with international law, why should we write and agree an international agreement with you, which to me is plain common sense. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Griffith.
Good morning, Chair. Chair, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week. The theme this year is community. According to the Mental Health Foundation, being part of a safe, positive community is vital for our well-being. Communities can provide a sense of belonging, safety, support in hard times, and give us a sense of purpose. The inquiry would like to acknowledge Mental Health Awareness Week. Chair, today we will be hearing from Deborah Coles of the organisation Inquest. There are broad themes to her evidence, which include the inadequacies of post-death investigatory processes, particularly from a family point of view. Inquest are calling for an independent investigatory body, and allied to this is Inquest's call for a national oversight mechanism to consider recommendations and the like arising from inquests and other forms of investigation. Another theme in the evidence will be the absence of a coherent and complete set of statistics in relation to those who die in mental health detention, and Inquest's relevant casework and what it reveals about the national picture and the Essex picture, the serious and concerning themes arising, including of a suggested closed culture at EPUT. Ms. Coles' evidence will highlight serious concerns from the perspective of her organisation and her own personal experience. In the afternoon, Chair, we will hear evidence from EPUT's Dr. Milind Kurale, who will be asked about the assessments process. His evidence will not touch on individual cases. That does mean, though, that today's evidence and information may be distressing in certain respects and difficult to listen to, including Ms. Coles and what she is going to tell us about Inquest's casework. For some, it may not be possible to sit through this session, and anyone in the hearing room is welcome to leave at any point. And again, I would like to remind people that emotional support is available for all of those who require it. The well-being of those participating in the inquiry is extremely important to the inquiry. And we have support staff from Hestia, an experienced provider of emotional support here today, and as I've said previously, for each day of the hearing, there's a private room downstairs where you can talk to Hestia support staff if you require emotional support. The Hestia staff are wearing orange scarves. Would you mind just raising your hand? And orange lanyards. You can speak to them directly, or if you want to, come up to a member of the inquiry team and we can put you in touch with them. We are wearing purple lanyards. And if you're watching online, information about available emotional support can be found on the Lampard Inquiry website. That's lampardinquiry.org.uk, and under the support tab, which is near the top right-hand corner. We want, Chair, all of those engaging with the inquiry to feel safe and supported. Chair, with that, I'm going to ask that we call Deborah Coles and ask that she comes to the table, please.
Welcome. Nice to see you. Good morning. Yeah. I, Deborah Coles, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would you provide your full name, please?
Deborah Jane Coles.
Ms. Coles, you provided the inquiry with a 47-page statement dated the 1st of April. Can you confirm that its contents are true and accurate?
Yes, I can.
Do you have the statement in front of you?
I do.
Please feel free to refer to it as you wish. Your statement and the exhibits that you've provided stand as part of your evidence, and so I won't be asking you about every aspect of your witness statement today. This is an introductory phase of the inquiry's hearings, and the focus in your evidence today will be on important general and systemic issues. Mm-hmm. May I ask you about names? In your statement, you refer to people who died as mental health inpatients in Essex. We'll come on to this later, but it's from your paragraph 58. And this is to illustrate and provide an evidence base for some of the points that you go on to make. Is it correct that Inquest has not, at this stage, provided to the inquiry the names of the individual deceased to whom you refer there?
Correct.
Does Inquest agree to work carefully and responsibly with the inquiry in order to make further disclosure to the inquiry of the names and further details in the cases on which you've relied in your statement?
Of course, yeah.
Before I go any further, I'm going to pause because I understand there's something you'd like to say.
Yes, I just wanted to say something to the families involved in this inquiry, and in particular I want to acknowledge the incredible strength, courage and determination of families who've been relentless in advocating for their loved ones in both life and in death, and in having to fight for truth, justice and accountability. And we know the trauma of your bereavement, but also the trauma in your dealings with the trust and the lack of candour and denial and false promises of learning and action, and how re-traumatising that has been. And this inquiry, I think, is an absolute testament to your perseverance. When someone you love is taken into mental health care, you expect them to be looked after and kept safe. The team at Inquest stand both in solidarity but in support for what you've achieved, but also recognise the emotional and physical impact of what you've been and are still going through. You've ensured that a light is being shone behind the closed doors of these mental health settings and focusing a light on the candour of the trust. And the truth must come out, and it's vital that your questions are asked and answered, and that through this inquiry we see the transformative systemic change that is so needed. Thank you.
I'd like to ask you about yourself first. Have you worked for the charity Inquest since 1989,
Yes.
becoming its co-director in 1994 and executive director in 2017?
I have.
And let's just check in what capacity you're giving your evidence today. Are you speaking as CEO of Inquest, i.e. on behalf of the organisation, in a personal capacity, or both?
Both.
Do you hold and have you held a range of other positions outside Inquest, including membership of the Independent Advisory Panel on Deaths in Custody, or IAPDC?
Yes.
Could you just explain in brief, what does the panel do?
The panel is a cross-government-sponsored panel, both by the Ministry of Justice, Home Office and Department of Health, and it provides independent advice to the Ministerial Board on Deaths in Custody. Its key aim is to prevent deaths in custody, including those detained under the Mental Health Act. It conducts research and I think it has been a very helpful addition in terms of exposing some of the issues around deaths, but particularly the deaths that this inquiry are concerned with, and I can talk about that a little bit more.
Well, as part of its role, does the IAPDC publish reports covering aspects of its work?
Aspects of its work, and I think importantly, a statistical bulletin looking at the number of deaths across state institutions.
Chair, I understand that you wish it to be made known that you were interim chair of the IAPDC for a period from 2015 to 2016.
Thank you, that's great.
Can we now move on to talk about Inquest, the organisation? So Inquest is a charity, is it, that was founded in 1981?
Correct.
What's the focus of its work?
I suppose our key work is working alongside families bereaved after what we would call state-related deaths. So that includes deaths in custody and detention, including mental health detention.
Can we just cover those so that people are aware? Clearly, we're going to be interested in your mental health-related work, but does Inquest also, as part of its remit, consider deaths in police custody, in prisons or young offenders institutions, and also in immigration detention.
Yes.
Have I missed anything?
No. And then we also work on deaths that raise questions about other multi-agency failings. So we've done some work on learning disability settings, deaths in learning disability settings, or where state and corporate accountability are in question. So that's included work around the Hillsborough football disaster and the Grenfell Tower fire.
Thank you. And is an important part of your work, inquest work, does that relate to post-death investigations?
Yes.
Can you just explain what that term encompasses, please?
So our work is, and our casework team that work directly with families help families navigate the post-death processes. And I think what people don't always realise is not only is a family dealing with or a traumatic death, but then there are legal processes that follow. So there are post-death investigations, and for the purposes of this inquiry, that will be the investigations conducted by the trust or private providers, or an independent investigation if one is instructed. And then you have the inquest system. And so the role of our organisation is to help families navigate those processes, to make sure that families are informed about what their legal rights are. Because what we too often find is that there is an information deficit after a death happens, and it's very difficult to understand exactly what is going to happen, not least when you're dealing with the trauma and the grief of having a loved one die in a place that you thought they would be safe.
Thank you very much. And in fact, we'll come on to talk about post-death investigations a little bit more later on. Does Inquest work across England and Wales principally, but occasionally further afield? Yes,
our primary area is England and Wales, but we have also been doing some work, well, I've been doing some work in Scotland, particularly around how deaths in Scotland are investigated, and I can talk about that particularly in the context of the National Oversight Mechanism.
Thank you. You've touched on this already, but could you provide a little bit more of an explanation of the role that bereaved people play in Inquest?
I mean, I think at the heart of our organisation are the experiences and voices of bereaved people, and our work with families informs all of our policy and campaigning work for systemic change. We have a family reference group made up of families who've been through inquests, a number of whom have had loved ones die whilst receiving mental health care. We also hold regular family forums, family listening days, where families can come together and talk about their experiences.
We'll actually come on to think a little bit more about the family listening days later on. Carry on.
So, I mean, I think what's probably important about the work that we do is that the work is directly informed by the day-to-day work that we do with bereaved people. And not only is that important in terms of our policy work, but also in trying to make organisations aware of what families need after a death. And obviously that's been work going over kind of nearly 4 decades, well, it is 4 decades before I joined. But our work is to try and not only prevent future deaths, but also try and improve the treatment of bereaved families more generally, and try and minimise the trauma of those post-death processes.
Thank you very much. You say in your statement, this is paragraph 6, that families are experts by experience. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Well, nobody knows better what it's like to have the death of a loved one in an institution that is ordinarily a closed institution, and where a family is reliant on that closed institution for every aspect of their loved one's treatment and care, and then when things go wrong, they best know what it's like to go through the system of trying to find out the truth. And I think it's important to understand that the processes that follow deaths are protracted. They can take a long time for an investigation or an inquest to take place. And what we will no doubt talk about is the experiences of many families who feel very very shut out from those processes that are there and should be there to answer those families' questions about how and why their loved one died in a place where they should have been safe. So when we talk about experts by experiences, that is a recognition that nobody knows better than bereaved people themselves about what it's like to go through those processes. But importantly, they best know what needs to change.
Thank you very much. Just now on to how Inquest is organised. Is it organised around casework, media and policy, family engagement, specific projects, operations, those general areas?
Yes, that's correct.
And does Inquest undertake its work with a relatively small number of staff and executive and governance by a board?
That's correct. I mean, I think sometimes people overestimate the size of the organisation because we are the only organisation that is doing this work. And that comes with it many challenges. I think the other important thing to say is that we are completely independent of government and we don't take government funding because we recognise the importance to families of our independence and our ability to speak truth to power, to be able to use our evidence in a kind of campaigning and policy way and to try and inform change. And I think one of the things I perhaps should have said around families, I mean, the other important role that Inquest plays alongside families is to try and ensure that the voices and experiences of families are heard by parliamentarians and policymakers, because I think the team can go off and talk to people, but actually the people you will remember, and I'm sure this will resonate with the inquiry, that actually it's the voices of bereaved people who you will remember, their stories, those human stories about what has happened.
Thank you. Well, I want to now ask you about the increase over the years that Inquest has experienced in its casework in mental health settings. You describe in your witness statement, this is from paragraph 8, Inquest's involvement from the early 1990s and up until recent time in a range of inquiries and commissions and the like concerning deaths in mental health settings. Was Inquest's early casework in relation to deaths where the deceased had been experiencing mental health conditions, initially in the police and prison context?
Yes.
Did mental health inpatient deaths become an increasing part of your casework?
It did, and in fact, in preparing for this statement, I was then reminded of my first experience quite early on in my career of giving evidence to the Louis Blom Cooper inquiry into the situation within Ashworth Hospital, and that was in 1992, which interestingly followed a Channel 4 documentary that had exposed ill treatment at the hospital, uncovering abuse, and was particularly concerned with the kind of brutalising and oppressive nature of what was going on. And that inquiry, I think, was probably the first inquiry, I think, in my experience, that gave a kind of insight into what was going on in mental health detention.
So just to pause there, that's 1992?
That was in 1992, yes. And I think because we had been aware of the impact of mental ill health on people's experience of prison and policing, particularly around excessive and disproportionate use of force, by way of example. We were then becoming more aware of deaths of mental health inpatients.
Thank you. You describe in your statement that there were important legal developments, including in a case where SEPT was a defendant. This is paragraph 16. In essence, were those legal developments decisions from the House of Lords and then the Supreme Court in two legal cases in 2008 and 2012 concerning Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights and people detained or de facto detained in psychiatric hospitals?
Yes, that's right.
What effect did those decisions have on inquest's casework?
I mean, I think by that time we had done further work. I don't know if you're going to take me to the earlier paragraphs, but we had started doing more work on mental health deaths. But obviously, these were two significant judgments, and particularly around the recognition that the Article 2 duty applied to people in detention and de facto detention, which was significant in the sense of, I suppose, an acknowledgement that these were deaths that warranted proper, public scrutiny. And we had seen a corresponding increase in the number of families that were turning to Inquest for help in the absence of any other organisation. I mean, I think it's just important to note, for context, that none of the mental health organisations work with bereaved families, so there is nowhere else for families to go. At one point in my early years at Inquest, the mental health charity Mind had a legal department that did take on some of these cases, but nobody does this work. And so in a way, we were filling a gap, and we recognised just how important it was that, deaths in another closed institution should be, properly investigated, but those families needed to be supportive, and in the same way as other families, they needed to be aware of what their legal rights were in terms of accessing, help and support.
By 2014, had mental health inpatient deaths come to make up a significant proportion of Inquest's casework?
Yes, yeah.
I think you may have described how it came about generally. Are there any other explanations for this increase that you haven't yet given?
I suppose because of the nature of our work and the fact that we'd been involved in, I don't know whether you want to take me to the death of Rocky Bennett.
We'll come on to that in a moment.
We'll come on to that, okay.
Yeah.
But I think what happened was there was kind of corresponding, people became more aware of our organisation and the work we were doing. And we were also, by 2014, not only did the deaths make up a significant proportion of our casework, but it became clear that we were seeing the kind of recurring nature of failings in mental health care that we were concerned about, and we were becoming more and more concerned about the system of investigation.
We'll come on to all of that.
Okay.
But you mentioned in your statement, this is paragraph 18, that even at this stage, key themes were emerging from your work in this area. Mm-hmm. Were these national themes rather than focused on one part of the country?
Oh, but definitely national.
Can you provide us with an indication of what those themes were, please?
Yes, I would say the first one was the lack of advice and support for families after deaths occur, but then failures to involve families in the care of their loved one whilst in mental health settings, lack of support in the community, and the significance of that being that many people were becoming in serious crisis and trauma and distress resulting in detention because there was the lack of support in the community. Familiar issues around observations, poor quality of care, poor assessments. I mean, I think what's quite depressing really for me in thinking about the work that Inquest has done over such a long period is that sadly these are all too familiar themes today. I think the other thing I would say is that, it was quite difficult when we first started working in this area because some of our work around police and prison deaths was making us aware about how prisons and policing were an inappropriate response to people in mental health crisis. And so we were advocating that there should be better mental health services and better support. At the same time, we were seeing mental health settings where you, at the very least, expected somebody to be safe because by the very nature you expect a mental health setting to be therapeutic, to have care at its heart, and yet we were seeing many of these really concerning features. The other one I should mention is around the overuse of restraint, concerning use of restraint, and also isolation and segregation, seclusion.
What approximate proportion of Inquest's current casework comprises inquests into deaths arising within mental health settings?
I think probably it would be fair to say about a third. I mean, we've, the real challenge that I need to kind of just, be candid about is that, we have far more families coming to Inquest than we can offer support to. So we are currently kind of rolling out a new way of working to try and make sure that whether or not we can give somebody full casework support, at the very least we want to make sure that our resources are made available. We're going to be holding workshops because there is a real gap here, and what families need when the worst thing has happened is they do need access to proper advice and support.
And some of that will be available online?
Absolutely. We have online resources, a handbook, etc.
You've spoken about the different things that Inquest does. I want to look at a couple of them briefly, please. First of all, your monitoring role, and then we'll come on to look at casework. Okay. What does Inquest monitoring and evaluation work involve?
Are you talking...
So this is,
do you want to take me...
So this is, we can look at paragraph 41 if you like. You talk about carrying out comprehensive monitoring and collating of statistics in relation to deaths in police custody, but not the equivalent in relation to deaths in mental health detention. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And then also about your monitoring as opposed to your casework role generally?
I mean, one of the things that we think is important is trying to make publicly available comprehensive data on who is dying and where they're dying in places of detention or in and following, for example, police contact. So we monitor and collate statistics, and we're able to do that because we draw on the official sources available as well as freedom of information requests.
We'll come on to talk a little bit more about those official sources.
Okay. But unfortunately, we're not able to carry out that formal monitoring in relation to mental health deaths because there has never existed a central comprehensive source of authoritative data of either mental health inpatient deaths or the deaths of those who've died in the community following contact with or under the care of mental health services. And this has been an issue that Inquest have raised for decades.
Well, we'll look at a little bit of that in a moment.
Okay.
So there's no formal monitoring, But is there in fact informal monitoring, for example, through prevention of future death reports?
Yes, I mean, all of our work is informed by our monitoring and collating of statistics where available, our monitoring of investigations and inquests into state-related deaths, and of course that will include the outcomes of inquests, both in terms of jury narrative conclusions and prevention of future death reports. And it's important just to make the point about jury conclusions, because there is no central collation of jury conclusions, which can be extremely important in understanding whether or not any system failings have been identified during the course of the inquest. So where we can and where we've been working with a family, we will collate those, and then we use that evidence to inform our policy work, and particularly our work to try and effect change, be that in the post-death processes or in regard to the issues that have been raised by the particular case and the subsequent evidence that's come out of an inquest.
Thank you. Well, we'll look at both what Inquest has been doing in relation to post-death issues and also statistics in a moment. Can we move, though, now first on to casework? In general terms, what casework consist of? You cover this in paragraph 22.
Yeah. So, I mean, I suppose our key motivation is to make sure that families are supported to navigate the processes that follow a death, and know how, well, and I suppose to enable and empower them to play a meaningful part in the investigation processes. And I think it's important to just kind of bear in mind that, as we will all know from experiencing the death of a loved one, you know, your initial kind of response is one of grief and dealing with those kind of post death processes, like the funeral, and you know, being with family and friends and loved ones. But where you have a death that has taken place in an institution, your ability to grieve and your bereavement is impacted by the very experience of having an investigation. You've had a death of a loved one in an institution. They hold all the resources, they hold all the knowledge, and you are having to try and find out what has happened at a time, as I say, when you're grieving and you're trying to hold, you know, your life together and support other family members. And so our role really is to try and make sure that you have access to information, you have access to a lawyer if that's what you want, and we would advise families to seek legal representation, because it can be extremely important whilst you're navigating the post-death processes, the funerals, to know that there's somebody who can be beginning to start to get the information together to begin to help you to understand why a death and how and why a death has happened. So will a caseworker work along, if a lawyer is instructed, does the caseworker continue and work alongside the lawyer? Irrespective of whether a lawyer is instructed or not, a caseworker will. And as I say, I mean, the other way of supporting is by trying to give families access to other forums where they can meet other families, where they can have kind of that informal support. Because one thing that families, you know, tell us time and time again is, you know, you're thrown into a really alien process. There's very often an information kind of deficit. It can be a very isolating and lonely place. And as I said earlier, it can take a very long time before you begin to get answers. And many families will tell us that they can't begin to grieve until they know the truth about what has happened.
So they put their grief on hold during this difficult time.
Absolutely.
Does the casework that you're talking about also form part of your information base? So you're talking about monitoring and so
Yes.
on. But is Inquest as an organisation also learning a lot about what's happening on the ground through its involvement in its casework?
Absolutely. And I mean, all of our work is informed by that evidence base.
And what is that? I mean, what kind of information, where you're working on a case with a caseworker, what kind of information is Inquest as an organisation gathering and recording?
Well, as much as possible with a relatively difficult database. You know, as an NGO, I'm sure people will understand that we don't have those great sophisticated systems. We'd love them, but we don't. But we will...
Can you remind me how big an organisation it is?
At the moment, we are a team of 16.
16.
Yeah. But only four caseworkers and one part-time casework assistant. So sorry. The question was...
Well, I was asking about the information that Inquest as an organisation gathers through its casework. You also address this at paragraph 31 of your statement.
Thank you. We will document as much information as possible, and that will be everything from how was a family informed about a death, what information were they given about where to go for advice and support, how candid was the information that was given to them by trusts and private providers, and then obviously, you know, as the case develops, as much information that we can glean from the different processes. So, you know, I would say that, you know, we have a huge amount of information about families' experiences of these processes going back decades.
And as you said, does the information that you're gathering through your casework go into your database?
Yeah. Prior to the database, obviously it was handwritten in folders and files, which we still have.
And the information in the database, you cover this in paragraph 31, is used for various purposes. Can you indicate what they are?
Well, I think, you know, it enables us as an organisation to draw out trends and patterns, both in terms of, you know, families' experiences of the post-death processes through to the issues that play out, you know, through the investigations and through the inquests. And, you know, in a sense, I think what we're trying to do is, you know, all of our work is about prevention. All of our work is to try and stop the deaths happening and kind of shining a light behind, you know, the closed doors of institutions. But also, I think rightly, it's about ensuring that these, you know, that these institutions that owe individuals a duty of care, and you've already talked about Article 2, but, you know, it's important to say that, you know, people who go into detention are completely dependent on others for their treatment and care. And in a sense, that's an extremely vulnerable position to be in. So it's also about ensuring that their human rights are respected and that they're treated with dignity and respect, and where there are human rights abuses, and in particular, you know, inhuman and degrading treatment, that those are brought to light in the hope that we can inform the change. Because every family that we work with will say that we want the truth about what has happened, and we want people to be honest and open about what has happened. But nothing can bring your loved one back, but they hope that by going through these protracted, distressing processes, they hope that something positive can come out. And that can give meaning to people's loss. That can be quite cathartic. It can be healing, but only if they see the corresponding change happen. And I think what is sometimes forgotten is that these processes by their very nature are re-traumatising. You will hear time and time again organisations say, oh, you know, we will, lessons will be learned. The most overused.
We'll come on to some of this a little later on. But I mean, as I understand what you're saying is that there can be a very important element in your casework where a loved one has died, with the possibility that that death is not in vain, because the hope is that meaningful change will be effected from the learning that comes out of it.
Yeah.
And if the processes aren't in place for that learning, then there are problems in grieving and so on.
Yes, and I would say even if the processes are not in place and you have a situation where you've had, you know, a very poor investigation, the inquest can then play an important role, and that can help to expose the truth and, you know, can help identify system failings. But I think what, again, is not recognised is what it's like to be a family who've gone through all those processes, have been told that there will be action, and then they learn of another death in similar circumstances, and that can be extremely traumatic. And I have to say that's something that, you know, speaking about my work with an inquest, it's the thing that makes me the most angry and frustrated and upset, is that, you know, we're still seeing those familiar issues.
I'm just staying with the subject of the data and the information that you as an organisation are able to gather. You say this at paragraph 42 of your witness statement, and this is something you've touched on. However, we do not carry out formal monitoring in relation to mental health deaths. This is because there's no central comprehensive source of authoritative data of either mental health inpatient deaths or the deaths of those who've died in the community following contact with or under the care of mental health services. You then have a footnote which says this: although we analyse data from our casework to inform the direction of strategic and policy work, to set casework priorities, make remit decisions, and for the purpose of specific reports, we do not therefore routinely collate and analyse our data as part of a formal monitoring role. The lack of a central data set, and we're going to come on to talk about all of that, also means that although we review case files to ensure any information published or shared is accurate, data arising from our casework is not statistically representative of the national picture. I just wanted to ask you about the last part of that. Data arising from our casework is not statistically representative of the national picture. Can you just explain what that means?
I mean, I think what it means is the fact that, you know, there is no corresponding data that we can go to say how many deaths there have been in particular, under particular trusts or private providers. It's a really disparate picture. And so our casework is only as representative as the families that we can work with or the families that come to us. But I would say that, you know, we work with families across the country, and I am confident that the trends and patterns that we draw out reflect many of the issues that this inquiry is looking at.
Thank you. I'm going to ask that a document's put up on a part of your statement's put up on the screen. Could you put up core bundle page 185 and expand paragraph 54, please? We can see here that you say, by way of overview, and sorry, this is dealing with data held by inquest. By way of overview, during the period under review by the inquiry, inquest has worked on a total of 7,460 cases across all types of deaths across England and Wales. This includes cases where we provided ongoing casework, but also where we provided initial advice. Of those, 1,843 are marked within our casework system as having been mental health related, and this will include the deaths of people who were detained under the Mental Health Act, receiving mental health care in hospital but not detained under the Mental Health Act, and deaths in the community. these deaths may also involve other agencies, for example, the police or the local authority. Well, first point, does that give us an idea of the extent of your casework?
Yes.
There's reference here to deaths in the community and involving other agencies, which may not come within the inquiry's terms of reference, depending on the particular circumstances. But I'd like to, at this stage, consider any other caveats the inquiry should have in mind when we're looking at or considering your data. And I'm staying with paragraph 54 and 55. In fact, can we look actually at the footnote at the bottom of the page, of the same page? The inquiry will note that these figures have been extracted using information recorded by our casework system and that they should be used as estimates only. For example, the dates used to identify cases within the relevant period refer to dates on which the case was opened on our system, not the date of death. Yeah. Further factors to be taken into account are then set out in the following paragraph. So that's something else we just need to bear in mind when we're looking or considering the information that you're providing to us. Could you take that down, please? And at paragraph 55, you list further limitations we need to bear in mind when considering inquest data.
Yeah.
To summarise, are they that the purpose for which inquest collects data is primarily to deliver its casework rather than to conduct a formal monitoring role, at least in relation to mental health, and the way it collects data is structured accordingly?
Yes.
And also the breadth of your remit as an organisation, including in relation to mental health, reflects your, it's a point you've just made, your casework capacity and operational realities, the amount of people, the amount of cases you can actually take on.
And particularly in mental health, such was the demand, we've had to make some very difficult decisions about those deaths that we can work in detail on. And, and sadly that, that's the reality of our funding situation. And that's particularly impacted on deaths in the community, which we started working on because we were so concerned about the number of people who were dying either for want of support from mental health services or who, in our view, had been discharged prematurely from mental health services to no proper support in the community. And also our work situates deaths in their broader kind of social and political context. And one of the concerns we had around mental health was that we were seeing cuts to frontline services, which in our view were impacting on people's ability to get proper, good mental health support in the community. And I think that alongside increasing austerity and inequality meant that we were seeing a real need for scrutiny of those deaths. But we, as I say, have had to make some difficult decisions purely because of our resources, not because we didn't recognise that those deaths needed, those families, importantly, needed that support.
Thank you very much. Just staying with other matters we just need to bear in mind when considering inquest data and information. Again, it's a matter you've touched on, but inquest record keeping has changed over time, starting with those manuscript records you were telling us about, transitioning to digital databases, with record keeping improving over time?
I would hope so, yes.
And I think, just staying on that theme, there was limited functionality of your first digital database, but that's a situation, as I understand it from your statement, which improved with a later version or versions.
Yeah, and I think you should also bear in mind that in the early years of doing this work, there was very limited disclosure to families. When I first started at the organisation, you were lucky if you turned up at an inquest with anything other than maybe a post-mortem report or a kind of front sheet with information on it. So of course that, as families importantly have been given more rights, and also as, the Article 2 of the Human Rights Act has impacted on the way in which inquests are held. there has been more corresponding information. So, of course, you know, that's...
Well, that is an important point. So earlier in the period of interest to this inquiry, we go back to 2000.
Yeah.
One of the reasons you as an organisation may have less information is that families themselves were receiving less information.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to now ask you broadly about cases falling in the inquiry's terms of reference, as you've assessed them to be. Have you, in fact, gone to individual case files held by inquest for the information, and we'll look at that information a little later on, about cases you've determined fall within the inquiry's terms of reference?
Yes.
Were you able to review cases that were held? I mean, do you have any files that are still in paper form, or has everything been transitioned onto a database?
We have many files in paper form.
Have you been able to review those for the purpose of the information that you provided to the inquiry?
I don't think we have. I think because of the fact you were looking at 2000 onwards, I think those were all, from memory, those were all within the database.
So the paper files relate to an earlier period?
They do, yes. I mean, for example, in preparation for the statement, I reviewed the Louis Blom Cooper inquiry, because that was obviously predated digitalisation, and I looked at kind of my statement for that by way of example.
To what extent do you think that limitations, inevitably, in the digital database mean you may not have identified all potentially relevant Essex cases that you hold?
I mean, I feel confident with the information we've provided in this statement. So I hope it's, I mean, I'm confident it's representative of the deaths that this inquiry is concerned with.
Thank you. So the casework service that inquest provides, when normally would that come to an end in any particular case?
It would usually come to an end at the conclusion of the inquest, the formal relationship. But of course, many families are interested in the process of policy change. So it may be that families will remain involved in the organisation and maybe come to some of the online connection cafes that we organise. They may play a role in some of our policy and campaigning work.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about next. In fact, on the basis of all of the information you gather from whatever source,
yes,
does Inquest also produce reports and provide evidence of matters within its knowledge and experience for a range of different organisations, including parliamentary and health bodies?
Yes, and we've been, I mean, you may come on to the...
Well, we're going to look at David Rocky Bennett in a second.
Oh, okay. But I'm also thinking of our family listening days.
Well, we're going to come on to those as well.
Fine.
Can we come on then to the David Bennett inquiry, which reported in 2003, so towards the beginning of the period of the inquiries, within the inquiry's terms of reference.
Yeah.
Who was David Bennett? You touch on all of this from paragraph 11.
Yeah. So David, known as Rocky Bennett, was a patient at an NHS-run clinic in Norfolk, and he died as a direct result of the restraint that was used against him. He died of asphyxia. He was restrained over a long period, and I think that for inquest, this was a death that was a reminder of the violence and racism that we had seen in police and prison context, and it was the first, probably the first death that we had worked on in detail with his family.
Was there an inquest in 2001?
There was.
And did the jury return a verdict of accidental death aggravated by neglect?
Neglect, yes.
And say that the cause of death was due to prolonged restraint, as well as long-term antipsychotic drug therapy?
Yes. I think we were fortunate at the time that there was a coroner who, from recollection, I believe, had got some mental health, had got a background in mental health. And there was an inquest in which the family were represented and were able to play a proper part in that process. And it was a full, I think, a full and actually focused importantly on the use of restraint.
Well, we'll look at aspects of that in a moment. The independent inquiry into the death of David Bennett, reported in December 2003, you speak in paragraph 12 of your statement of inquest's evidence to that inquiry and what it highlighted.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's important here is that I think similar to this inquiry, it was the family's determination that something positive could come out of his death that informed the decision to set up that independent inquiry, to which we gave evidence, and we raised a number of issues. And I think importantly, to address your earlier point, we highlighted the lack of data to enable monitoring of deaths and mental health detention, so that it was difficult to understand not only who was dying but why they were dying, and that for us was particularly important in the context of race and ethnicity.
Did you also highlight issues in post-death investigations?
We did.
We're going to look at the report and pick up on those.
Okay.
So the inquiry went on to make various recommendations itself, didn't it?
It did, yes.
Could you put up, please, Exhibits Bundle, page 14339, and expand the right-hand column? Thank you. Can you actually read that? I'll read the relevant
I can.
bits. So we can see at the top there, sudden death in psychiatric hospitals. The inquiry found the evidence relating to sudden deaths in psychiatric hospitals to be unclear.
Mm-hmm.
The statistics were unsatisfactory, so it was difficult to draw clear conclusions from them. We recommend that more detailed statistics are kept so that it can be known how many patients in mental health institutions die when being restrained or within a short time thereafter, with details of their ethnic grouping. And if we drop down a little bit, we can see Inquest told us that since 1996 there'd been monitoring of the ethnic origin of people who die in custody, but this did not include deaths of detained patients. So is that going back to the point about different collection of data for those in police or prison detention?
Yes, I mean it followed some lobbying from recollection of the United Nations in highlighting the lack of data and the lack of any kind of monitoring of race and ethnicity, and that then prompted this to be looked at in the context of police and prison, but not in the context of deaths of detained patients. I mean,
Yeah. So may I just finish the paragraph?
You may,
because
yeah.
it says there was a gap in information,
Mm-hmm.
not only about who was dying, but why they were dying.
Yeah. I mean,
yes.
what I was going to say is what is really quite depressing about this is that this is the situation that remains today. And you will note from the independent advisory panel's most recent statistical bulletin that they make the very same point.
Well, we're going to be tracking this point through a couple of different reports over time in a moment. Does the inquiry report go on to say that the inquiry notes that coroners make recommendations from time to time and proposes that those recommendations should be monitored and collated centrally? And Inquest told us that the failure by the NHS to provide information and support to families after a death had a highly detrimental effect on families' mental health. Again, picking up on points you've already made to us. Can we therefore see recommendations there covering, as you've just said, unsatisfactory statistics into an important aspect of mental health care? And in fact, the report does go on, this is recommendation number 11 in the report, to make this recommendation that the Department of Health should collate and publish annual statistics on the deaths of all psychiatric inpatients, which should include ethnicity. And we can see in the highlighted or expanded part there also the recommendation in relation to coroners' recommendations and that they should be centrally collected and monitored. Would you please go to the next page and expand the left-hand column just at the top? So the next page, Thank you very much. So this is continuing on from what we've just been looking at. And we can see here a paragraph starting, families should have access to information about where to go for a help after a death of a family member who was in a mental health institution. Again, picking up on points you've already made to us. And can we see towards about halfway down, if there was an investigation after the death, families should have an effective access to that investigation process from the beginning to the end. The investigative body should be an independent body. One was left with the feeling that some people's lives did not have equal worth with others. And so here we see, a recommendation for an independent investigative body.
Indeed.
Could you take that down, please? You refer in your statement to concerns, this is paragraph 47, but we don't need to go to it, over deep inequalities in access to mental health care and outcomes, particularly in respect of black people. Mm-hmm. Is that, so we saw it here in relation to a report over 20 years ago. To what extent have those issues improved over time?
They haven't. And I think I've provided examples of more recent literature. I mean, I think there's an acknowledgement by some, at least, that racism is embedded into those structures of healthcare, and we know that black people are more likely to enter the mental health system via the criminal justice system. They are more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act, more not likely to be placed under community treatment orders, and then when they're actually in detention, that they are more likely to be subject to violence, the use of restraint and isolation, particularly prone restraint. And I think, this has been the subject of research. It's been...
Is one of the relevant reports which you provided to the inquiry a rapid review from February 2022, the NHS Race Health Observatory report, Ethnic Inequalities in Healthcare. And does that pick up on some of the points you've just been telling us about?
It does.
Thank you. Chair, I'm about to move on to a new topic. We've been going for about an hour and 10 minutes. Would this be a good time for a 15-minute break?
Of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you in 15 minutes.